Hey guys, Woods Farm here, just back working on Project 222. I think this is episode 16. Just an update on the international car show put on by D-Boss Garage. If you guys haven't been keeping track, the Scout car actually took a tie for third place in bracketry, so that was pretty cool. And I know the Kubel wagon got mentioned in the tribute category, so pretty exciting. Obviously these vehicles are way too weird to really kind of go in the mainstream, but it's fun to enter them in the car show anyways. As for this episode, we're going to be working on the rear shocks. I finally got them in the mail, so we can fabricate something now that will work. And we also are going to finally tackle this radiator. We're going to replace it with one that better replicates the dimensions of the original radiator. So we got to strip the old one out and build a bunch of brackets to hold the new radiator and hook everything up. So that's what we're going to be working on over the next couple of weeks. Okay, so we're back out working on the Scout car, and today we're going to actually start working on replacing the radiator, and we're going to work on the rear shocks. So a little bit of a big job ahead of us. The first thing we got to do is drain the rad and remove the old one. So we'll start that, and we're going to kind of design the rad support and the shocks sort of at the same time. Figure it's easier to do this all at the same time because the radiator is very close to where we're actually going to mount the shocks. So something else we need to work on is we need to make brackets to hold this a little bit higher up. We're going to base the brackets off of this position here. Kind of thought it was going to go the other way. Okay, so we've got the old rad off, and we're starting to work on the shocks. There's also a cross piece that's going to join the two sides here that the radiator is going to mount on. I got to figure out what to do with the transmission cooler lines. I think I'm going to cut them back some more, bend them into a slightly different position, and I can flare them with some fittings, and then they'll join up to the rubber hose that goes into the transmission oil cooler. So we're figuring this thing's not going to see too much abuse when it comes to off-road. We did want to have shocks in the back just to kind of smooth things out, but we don't need a lot of support. But the shock needs to mount to the frame and the axle, and we didn't want to actually have it tied into the body. So we've got a vertical piece here which moves up and bolts into the shock. And then we figured the easiest thing to do would be to use the actual existing mounts on the axle. So I had thought about actually making a different mounting point on the axle, but there was pre-existing mounting points for shocks on the axle, and we decided we're just going to use those. It was the fastest thing to do. It kind of pushed the shock up a little higher than I would have liked, but it definitely saved time to use those mounts. And there's the one on the driver's side. We don't have the vertical support in place yet, but you can get a different view of that mount on the axle there. This is the cross piece, and it's going to have mounting points for the radiator, and it's also going to have a mounting point for the transmission oil cooler and the fan. Okay, so we've got the rad in place and the brackets are fabricated and set up. So now we're just going to work on figuring out how to get the fan installed and mounted. We've got to add some tabs down here that will allow us to put a bar across the bottom, and we'll be able to bolt the fan to that. You can see how much smaller this radiator is, and it's a way better, it's way closer to the original, so the inside of the crew compartment will look a little more authentic. So we just started with the cross piece that shoots across there, and then there's a couple of brackets, and we also have a vertical support. And I don't know if you can see, but originally for the framework there was a bar that came across here, and that was just for support and temporary. So we've moved it back to where the actual firewall, the rear firewall, starts right here. So now we've got the top part, so we can start framing in the back firewall, which will include a mesh grill that goes over top of the radiator. And at the back here is where the electric fan is going to get mounted, so we're just working on some brackets to install that. It's been pretty hard to get little things like hose clamps and stuff like that, stuff that you find you end up not having and you need because of COVID. You can't just run to the hardware store and pick stuff up. We're in a lockdown again, so we're kind of trying to make do with what we got. Luckily Napa is essential, so we're able to get some parts there. And one of the things we worked on is redoing and reconnecting all the radiator hoses to the new radiator, and tonight we finished that up. I particularly like this bracket we built here. It's mounted to the framework here. You can unbolt it, and this junction here is actually attached, and what that does is it actually positions the hose up and out of the way and puts it in a really nice position. And we were able to track down this really nice flexible hose with a 90-degree, and it works really well here. This was one of the problems on the old setup. The hose here had kinked, partially because it was just flopping around. So this clamp holds everything up, and then it runs up to the top of the radiator. And then we sort of simplified things on the bottom. I got a couple more generic flexible hoses, and we actually ran it through a piece of muffler pipe, and that's the setup that they had before, but they had kind of a bent piece of muffler pipe. And what we ended up doing to change things is we kind of moved the hoses a little further away from the exhaust manifold and downpipes, because I was worried this lower rad hose was just a little close and it was going to absorb a lot of heat from the exhaust, and I was just worried about things getting too hot. So we kind of routed it a little further around the best we could. So the rad is working. We've got the fan hooked up and everything's in place. We just gotta watch it and check for leaks. We may actually grab some more hose clamps and double up in some places, like this lower junction, and some of these spots we might double up on the hose clamps just to make sure everything is watertight. So we finally went ahead and made a battery box and settled on a location. We didn't have a lot of options ultimately. It's really hard to visualize, but there's going to be sort of a diagonal wall that starts right here and kind of comes across. So I'm not sure if we're going to have a little access hatch that will allow us to remove the battery from inside the crew compartment, but it's going to be really tricky. There'll be a small hatch right here on the side of the engine bay, but you're not going to have clearance to pull the battery out and replace it. You would be able to open this hatch up and throw on booster cables, for instance, if you needed to boost it. Short of that, if you take the entire rear engine cover off, which we have it set up to do, a little labor intensive, but if you do that, you should be able to scooch the battery in and out. So how we're going to access it will depend, but really we didn't have a lot of options of where to put it. This spot seemed to make the most sense. It's close to the starter, and we're starting the wiring. The fuse box is going to be mounted on this back firewall right here, so all of the electrical is kind of centralized right in this area, so it made the most sense to have the battery mounted there. Okay, so summer's almost here, and I'm starting to get busy with other farm projects. We were out cutting wood the other day, and pretty soon I'm going to have to start bush hogging and cutting the fields and doing all that kind of stuff that keeps me really busy in the summer. So the 222 is going to get put on hold at least until the fall. That said, we are going to keep tinkering on it over the summer. Hopefully we end up getting the fuel system put in place. We want to get the gas tank mounted, get the fuel lines run, and then the other thing we want to do is scrounge up some exhaust parts and get the muffler and the exhaust system finished. And once those two things are done, we basically have all the mechanical wrapped up. And I've been pretty lucky over the last month or so. I've been able to scrounge up a whole bunch of material for really cheap. I've got some 1/8 plate and some 3/16 plate, some big sheets that we're going to use for the body work. And the other good thing that I managed to scrounge up was a whole pile of like 1/4-inch diamond plate, which we're going to use for the floor. I'm not sure if I have enough diamond plate to do the whole floor, but I got a smoking good deal on a couple big sections, and I think I can do about 80% of the floor. So those will be the things that we do work on this summer, and we're definitely on track and on schedule. So hopefully by the fall, you know, once winter hits and we're working on it all the time, the body work should go pretty fast. So that's the plan. If you have any questions or comments, always leave them below. And as always, thanks for watching.